Next quarter, maybe. Lauren Calloway didn't even blink when she said it. The words clicked out of her mouth like a stapler misfiring, sharp, efficient, slightly jammed with insincerity. I sat in the chair across from her desk and watched the fluorescent tubes above us hum their cold sermon across the room. Her corner office had a view of the river, but she kept the blinds half closed, like daylight might reveal too much. She flipped through budget reports that, judging by the unbroken staples, she hadn't actually read. I named the numbers anyway, as if numbers could open a locked door. 4 years at Meridian Consulting. 2 years managing Patterson Industries. $3 million in revenue last year. 96% client retention. Spotless performance reviews. She nodded at the air between us and said we needed to be strategic about compensation adjustments. Strategic, her favorite synonym for no. I asked for a timeline. Specifics. An actual date instead of the fog of soon. She gave me a look that balanced annoyance and mentorship, the way a person looks at a dog that has learned too many tricks and not enough obedience. Big picture, Evan. We're all making sacrifices. Exley is another way seeing day way. I left the office with that sentence buzzing in my ear like a fly that refuses the window. Maya at reception was booking appointments. 2 junior consultants were arguing quietly over who would own a slide in a deck, and my cubicle waited with its stack of Patterson files and a coffee gone the color of ash. Meridian had a soundtrack copier jams, tapping keys, the small cough of people trying not to be heard. I walked through it, down to the garage, and sat in my old Civic, hands on the wheel, engine off. 10 minutes passed with the cement pressing the sound out of everything. 4 years, same salary I'd started with. Meanwhile, Lauren collected promotions like souvenir mugs, new title, new car, same tone. That night, I opened my laptop and dusted off my resume. I didn't send it anywhere. I just wanted proof that the world still existed beyond these gray walls and recycled phrases. Job boards blinked with senior roles, places that said promote from within without meaning promote someone's nephew. I bookmarked postings the way you bookmark a city you might move to one day, secretly, privately, as an act of oxygen. 3 days later, Lauren drifted past my desk and let a stack of reports fall like a small avalanche. Patterson on top, yellow sticky note. Handle renewal. Emphasize our value proposition. Our value proposition. I turned the folder over and felt a switch flip inside me, quiet and final. For the first time in 4 years, I wondered what would happen if I stopped treating Lauren's approval like rent I owed to stay in the building. I remembered my first week here, when Harold Verlin still walked the halls and said people's names like a welcome mat. He'd told me instincts were rarer than formulas. I believed him. I wanted to believe Lauren, too. But sitting there with the Patterson file, I realized belief had an invoice, and mine was long past due. I picked up the phone anyway. My voice was steady. My hand wasn't. Something was changing, and it wasn't the budget. I didn't step into Meridian as a cynic. I walked in like a person arriving at a lighthouse. Harold Verlin was still there, then gray hair that looked like wind, a habit of asking one more question after everyone else stopped. He interviewed me for 2 hours without glancing at his phone. We sketched markets on a whiteboard until our markers died, and when I admitted I cared more about patterns in people than patterns in spreadsheets, he smiled. Instincts, he said, are the one metric you can't fake. On my first Friday, he stood by the elevators and learned the barista's name from the cart downstairs. He remembered it on Monday. 6 months later, the lighthouse changed owners. A private equity firm acquired Meridian and sent a welcome packet that smelled faintly of laminate and certainty. The first all-hands with Lauren Calloway felt like a new alphabet, right-sizing, synergies, optimizing human capital. She said velocity, the way a coach says discipline. We all nodded because nodding is a currency at moments like that. What I didn't know yet, in the new ledger, people were cost centers, unless they produced miracles every quarter. Somewhere a spreadsheet learned to swallow names. The air in the office shifted a few degrees at a time, too slow to complain about without sounding dramatic. Analysts who used to share models quietly started hoarding data like winter grain. Chairs in conference rooms were suddenly prized territories you didn't leave your notebook behind as a placeholder unless you could defend it. Talent bled out through the exits with polite emails, pursuing new opportunities, grateful for the learning. I watched 3 of the sharpest minds I knew walk away in suits that didn't wrinkle. Lauren replaced them with hungry graduates who could work late and didn't yet know what wasn't possible. She called it pipeline development. I called it amnesia. Somewhere along the way, I became legacy. I heard the word float across a muted conference call. Legacy employees resistant to change. No names, just a silhouette that matched my reflection in the glass. I'd been here 4 years. I'd learned our clients' seasons like weather. I thought that counted as value. But value, I was learning, changes definition depending on who's holding the marker. At home, my father's voice lived in the walls 37 years at the Ohio plant. One lunch pail. The same joke about the vending machine coffee never getting better. He believed in staying the course because the course had once led somewhere. Companies reward dedication, he'd say. And when he said it, it was true. I wanted to keep that truth for him, for me. But in our era, loyalty felt like a bridge toll charged to one side only. I adapted because that's what you do when the temperature shifts. You put on a sweater and pretend winter's not early. I took the projects, hit the targets, gave the juniors room to try and fail without dressing them down. Some nights, I lingered at my desk after everyone left and tried to hear Harold's voice. Under the hum, instincts are hard to teach. The hum was louder. By then, I could feel the ground had moved. I just didn't know yet that I had too. The Patterson file sat on my desk like a brick with a ribbon. Thick, familiar, heavier than memory should be. The yellow sticky note in Lauren's handwriting, tilted letters that always looked like they were hurrying somewhere without me, said, "Handle renewal. Emphasize our value proposition." I ran my thumb along the tab until it warmed. 2 years of calls at odd hours. Factory tours where the air tasted like tin. Budget season sprints that ended in paper cuts and quiet nods. If accounts had a pulse, Patterson's matched mine. I lifted the cover and felt a click inside I couldn't unhear. Not anger, exactly. A smaller, cleaner sound. The clean break of a twig underfoot that tells you you've left the trail and can't pretend otherwise. I opened my calendar, highlighted the renewal milestones, and scheduled the kickoff call. My hand did what it always did. The rest of me didn't. On my lunch break, I stood by the window and watched the river throw light back at the sky. My father had a way of looking at water like it was a contract, steady, plain, binding. He used to say fairness might be slow, but it shows up. I carried that sentence around like a pocket knife. Useful, comforting. The trouble is, fairness can get lost in the mail. Standing there, I thought about what my dad taught me and what the price of it had become. Not a betrayal, just an audit. That night, I opened the job board tabs I'd left like crumbs and let them breathe on the screen. Senior Consultant Strategic Growth. Client Director Pacific Northwest. Benefits spelled out without coyness. Salaries that didn't hide behind commensurate. I read employee reviews that mentioned mentorship like a real practice, not a line item. I didn't apply. It wasn't fear. It was the superstition that clicking submit would break something I couldn't fix, and I wasn't ready to hear the sound again. Instead, I did smaller rebellions. I walked home the long way. I cooked dinner without a podcast to fill the air. I wrote a list called What I Know How to Do and surprised myself with its length. Rescue failing timelines, read a room in 7 seconds, map a market in an afternoon, make a plant live under office lights. I added, know when a door is a wall. The next morning, I called Patterson. Dana Rios, their CEO, answered with her usual brisk kindness. We talked inventory cycles, freight volatility, how their Southeast facility was recovering after a supplier collapsed. I offered the plan I'd drafted at midnight, conservative, honest, scalable. She thanked me for the steadiness. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the black screen of my phone. You can be steady and still move, I thought. Rivers do. I set the Patterson folder back on my desk like a promise I intended to keep for them, for me. Somewhere in the building, a copier jammed and then, surprisingly, cleared. Paper slid out whole. I took it as a small omen. Not that the machine was fixed. That I was. The call found me between spreadsheets and the kind of silence that makes a person overly aware of their own breathing. Unknown number. Portland area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, then tapped accept like a gambler who knows the wheel has already picked a number. Evan Mercer? Marcus Weller, Northglen Analytics. Noah Kim suggested I reach out. My name on his tongue startled me more than the introduction. Marcus Weller wasn't a rumor. He was a case study. The guy who built a book of business without setting people on fire to keep the quarterly numbers warm. He spoke in a low register, unhurried. In a room where everyone always sounded like they were running late, his voice felt like a chair. "I've followed your work on Patterson Industries," he said. "Those retention numbers aren't an accident. We're expanding our strategic practice, and I think you'd be a fit." I stood, suddenly aware of the glass walls of the small conference room I ducked into. Beyond them, Meridian went on with its performance of busyness. Lauren gesturing at a slide like the truth was hiding behind a bullet point, a junior pacing with a phone to his ear, Maya fielding a complaint with the grace of a diplomat at a border checkpoint. I pressed a knuckle into my palm and said, "I'm interested, tell me more." He didn't sell me on ping-pong tables or the myth of family. He asked how I approached a market when the numbers contradicted the narrative. He asked what I do when a client wants speed but needs sequence. He listened to my answers instead of waiting for his turn to talk. Then he said the phrase that slid fresh air into my lungs. "We can walk through our compensation structure when we meet." Compensation structure. Not priorities, not constraints, not the museum label that says, "Do not touch." It was a door being opened and the invitation to decide whether I wanted to walk through. "How's Thursday at 2?" he asked. I glanced at the calendar, at the hive of meetings that felt like sand traps. "Thursday at 2 works." "Great. I'll send the address. You'll meet with me and one of our directors. No need to prepare theater. Bring your brain." I laughed before I could stop myself. "I can do that." "Which is a weed into Finner Road." When the face was as this fresh. After we hung up, I stared at my phone a long moment, as if it might glow. The feeling that came wasn't triumph. It was something quieter and more dangerous, relief. Like loosening a tie you didn't realize had been cinched since you were 25. I walked to Maya's desk and asked for a personal day. "Doctor's appointment," I said, and the words didn't taste like a lie. My career needed a checkup. Maybe a reset of a stubborn bone that had healed wrong. Back at my cube, I opened a blank note and typed 3 lines. What I owe: Meridian, professionalism, clean handoffs, respect. What Meridian owes me: respect. Compensation that respects the work, a path. What I owe myself: not mistaking endurance for loyalty. Lauren swept by, perfume like a comma in the air. She didn't look up. I didn't care. Thursday had a shape now. I closed the Patterson file carefully, as if nothing had shifted, and felt everything tilt a degree toward oxygen. Northglen's lobby felt like someone had opened a window on purpose. Light poured in without apology, hitting the polished concrete and the small jungle of plants that didn't look like they were paid by the week. No vending machine coffee grinding its teeth in the corner, an actual barista behind a small counter, steam spiraling like a sentence that didn't need to shout. Marcus met me himself, no assistant shielding him, no clipboard gauntlet to run. He shook my hand the way you shake a person's hand, not a problem's. We walked past open project spaces where conversations sounded like they were about ideas, not blame. Whiteboards, with more verbs than jargon. A printer that worked. I noticed the details because details tell the truth when words get tired. He settled me in a glassed-in room that faced a row of maples. We talked for 2 hours that passed like one. He asked about Patterson's procurement bottleneck last spring and how I'd gotten them to stagger bids without spooking finance. He wanted to know what I do when a client's story disagrees with their spreadsheet and the better kind of conflict that follows. When I paused to think, he let the pause stay. Silence was not a threat here. It was a tool. A director named Priya joined for the second half. She zeroed in on sequencing, on how I'd aligned ops and sales without making either side feel like the villain. "We try to measure what we actually value," she said, smiling as if that shouldn't be radical. "Otherwise, the metrics end up measuring us." I told her I split my time between rooms and shop floors, that a factory's rhythm will tell you what a slide can't. She wrote that down. Not the exact words. The idea. We drifted to numbers at the end, the way decent conversations do when both sides already know whether trust exists. Marcus laid it out plainly. A base that was 30% above my current salary. Performance bonuses tied to actual revenue created rather than quarterly theatrics. And a clear banding structure that showed how people moved and why. No mystery ladders. Transparency that didn't feel performative. Benefits read like someone had mapped a human life and budgeted for it, health coverage without the fine print sting, a real professional development fund, time that wasn't a dare to use. I didn't try to look inscrutable. I felt something unfasten in my chest, and I let it show. This is fair, I said, which sounded almost like confession. On the drive back to Meridian, the city's gray felt less like a ceiling and more like neutral light. Same buildings, new outline around them. The garage swallowed my car as it always did, but when I stepped onto the 5th floor, the carpet didn't pretend to be anything except tired. Lauren's door was cracked. Voices rose and fell like weather I no longer needed to forecast. At my desk, the Patterson file waited steady, faithful. I touched its spine and felt the day's contour, a before and an after drawn cleanly down the middle. Nothing at Meridian had changed. The copier would jam again by 3. Someone would rehearse a word like synergy until it died. But I had changed, and sometimes that's the only lever you get. I opened my calendar and blocked an hour. Think. Then I did. Monday came in wet and ordinary, the kind of Portland drizzle that edits the city into softer lines. I took the bus instead of driving, wanting the quiet between stops, the small democracy of shared air. On my lap, a slim folder with salary surveys and notes, 3 sources triangulated, numbers highlighted in a clean yellow that didn't scream. I'd promised myself I would ask one last time in a way no one could mistake for emotion, just math, and what math implies about respect. Lauren was already at her desk at 8, coffee cupped like a prop. I asked for 15 minutes. She gave me 10 with the practiced generosity of someone selling something that cost them nothing. I sat down, opened the folder, and slid 1 page across. I'm currently 23% below market for senior consultants in Portland with my years in book, I said, voice steady. Here are the sources. Here's the range. Here's my 4-year revenue, 12 million total, 3 last year from Patterson alone. I'm asking for an adjustment that puts me at median, plus a plan for movement tied to outcomes we both agree on. She didn't look at the page long. Her face arranged itself into something between patient and scolding. Market rates are inflated right now, she said, the way a person might say the tide was being dramatic. Companies are overpaying to attract talent. It won't last. We're focused on stability, not caving to benchmarks set by less disciplined firms. I wanted to ask which firms those were, and if she'd said that when she took her own raise, but questions like that don't change the weather. I kept to the path. Stability isn't the same as underpayment, I said. I don't need a windfall. I need parity, and a clear path that isn't a moving target. It's no. She stood, walked to the window, looked down at the lot where my Civic sat like a lowercase letter next to her leased BMW. You're thinking short-term, Evan, she said softly, the softness that comes right before the cut. This is a place that values team wins over individual recognition. Not everyone understands that. Some people need constant validation. There it was, the reflex to turn a request into a diagnosis. To make money about character. I felt the old impulse to defend myself and let it go. I'm not asking for confetti, I said. I'm asking for compensation that reflects the work. She turned back. Not possible right now. If that's unacceptable, perhaps this isn't the right environment for your goals. The sentence landed like a stamp on an envelope already addressed. I closed the folder, slid the paper back in, and stood. Thank you for your time, I said, and I meant it. Clarity is a kindness, even when it arrives cold. At my desk, I stared at the clock for exactly 3 breaths, then called Marcus. If the offer stands, I said, I'm ready. It stands, he said, and we're glad. I hung up and watched a bead of rain crawl down the window, slow and certain, finding its route as if it had been there all along. I printed the resignation letter on Meridian letterhead because symmetry felt honest. 4 lines. Courteous, concise. Gratitude for the opportunities. Notice of intent. 2 weeks offered for a clean handoff. The paper was warm when it slid out of the tray, as if it knew more than I did about what came next. Before I could cross the hall, Maya's voice came over the intercom, unusually formal. Evan, Lauren would like to see you. The phrasing had a way of making sound like must. Lauren's door was already open. She gestured at the chair. A folder lay in front of her, tabbed and tidy. Close the door, she said, tone velvet over stone. I sat with the letter in my hand, the way you might hold a ticket you're not sure will be honored. I've been thinking about our conversation, she began, and reviewing your recent activity. The words, recent activity, clicked together like handcuffs. She didn't wait for a question. Northglen called one of our senior partners yesterday. Apparently they have been recruiting in our ranks. My mouth went dry, not from guilt, but from the way accusation can siphon water from a room. I set the letter on her desk, aligned to the edge. We should talk honestly, I said. That's my resignation. I've accepted an offer with Northglen, 2 weeks' notice, effective today. Her expression moved through weather surprise, heat, and then the chill I'd come to recognize as strategy. You interviewed with a direct competitor while employed here, she said, savoring each noun. After all, we've invested in your development. I did it on personal time, with personal resources, I replied. You asked me to consider if this was the right fit. I did. This is disappointing, Evan. She tapped the folder, as if disappointment could be itemized. Let's not pretend this is about growth. Competitors recruit to extract clients, processes, intelligence. You understand the ethical landscape. There it was, the shadow she wanted to cast, professional ambition, reframed as espionage. I kept my voice level. All Meridian information remains with Meridian. That's standard, and it's my intention. She leaned back, considering the ceiling as though it might supply the next line. Then we agree it's best to expedite your departure. Today will be your last day. IT will revoke access. Please return your badge by close of business. She paused, then added, I'll be reaching out to Marcus Weller to ensure he has a complete picture of your performance and conduct. The ellipsis landed like a smear. I understood the message. If she couldn't keep me, she could try to cloud me. That's your prerogative, I said. I'm confident in my record. Bading, Theander du Alexter. Minutes later, Maya walked me back to my desk with the resigned gentleness of someone who has practiced this choreography. I filled a banker's box with the sum of 4 years. The mug that said, Decent Human, a sturdy plant that had learned to live under winter light, a framed photo of my parents squinting into Ohio sun, a stack of journals I'd bought with my own money because curiosity wasn't reimbursable. Eyes lifted and ducked as I passed, sympathy disguised as focus. I signed the equipment return form and placed my badge on it like a period. The elevator doors reflected a thinner version of me, and then swallowed him whole. In the garage, I slid the box into the Civic and sat with my hands on the wheel, laughing once short, real, not cruel. Relief had a shape I hadn't recognized until it was mine. On the drive home, the rain lifted. The sky wasn't brighter. It was honest. I called Marcus and told him what had happened. Then let's move your start to Monday, he said. And for the record, Lauren already called. We've done our diligence. His calm undid a knot I'd mistaken for posture. The road opened in front of me, ordinary and wide. Monday arrived early because I barely slept. Not from nerves, but from the odd quiet that follows a thunderclap. I took my coffee black and my steps slow, wanting to feel each threshold I crossed. Northglen's lobby smelled faintly of cedar and espresso. The light had the same generous angle as before, as if the building remembered me. Marcus met me at the elevator with a nod that felt like the opposite of ceremony. Glad you're here, he said. No speech about family, no confetti metaphor, just a simple sentence that let the day begin. It had my workstation ready. A welcome packet weighted 4 pages, clear fonts, no slogans trying to rearrange my brain. Benefits weren't couched in, we wish we could. They were facts. Health coverage without employee contribution, mental health sessions treated like normal medicine, a professional development budget that wasn't an exotic rumor, equity after 6 months. The handbook didn't read like a list of traps. It read like a map. There was a progression grid with titles, competencies, and pay bands described in full sentences. If X, then Y logic I could show to a future self and not feel foolish. Priya stopped by with a laptop stand and a smile. Onboarding scavenger hunt, she said, placing a small card on my desk. Find someone in finance who can explain why we moved from quarterly to rolling forecasts. Not because you'll be tested, because it's good to know who knows things. I liked the honesty of that. Knowing where the knowledge lives is half the work. At noon, Marcus walked me through the pipeline. Not the puffed-up variety with imaginary deals marked verbal, but a list of real conversations with real timelines. He narrated the misses along with the wins, as if the truth had a right to sit at the table. When he got to a line item labeled Patterson Monitoring, he looked up. "We've heard rumblings they're unhappy with Meridian," he said. "No action yet. When a client wants to move, they'll let you know. Or they won't, and they'll move anyway. Our job is to be ready without being predatory." It was a tone I recognized as rare, competitive without cruelty. I told him I'd keep an ear open without flexing one muscle of my old connections. We shook on that promise without touching it again. In the late afternoon, I read more of the handbook. A small section titled How We Evaluate spelled out things I'd always wanted to see in writing. What counted as impact, how we cut through noise, when to say no to work shaped like a trap. There were examples with numbers and examples with people. The last line was almost plain to the point of poetry. "We keep score in ways that make us proud to reread later." My phone buzzed. "Noah. Heard you started. Welcome to the side that labels chords." I laughed, typed back a photo of my tidy desk, the plant from Meridian already leaning toward the window like it had been waiting for this light. On the way out, I passed a bulletin board with small squares of paper pinned neatly. Volunteer shifts, a book club schedule, a note about a scholarship fund for hourly staff. Nothing screamed virtue. It just existed. Outside, the sky had decided on blue. I stood there a minute, feeling how ordinary joy can be when no one is rationing it. I walked to the bus with a handbook in my bag and something lighter in my chest. Not triumph. Something steadier, like the floor beneath me had been leveled while I wasn't looking. 6 weeks into Northglen, the days had settled into a rhythm that didn't bruise. I could feel my focus lengthening, like a muscle that had finally been taught its proper movement. On a drizzly Tuesday, Marcus tapped the frame of my doorway with 2 knuckles and set a folder on the desk, the way a person might set down bread. "Thought you should see this," he said, unreadable but not unkind. On the tab, Patterson Confidential. Inside, emails printed with the dates still warm along the margins. Exchanges between Dana Rios and Meridian managers that began polite and migrated toward brittle, missed milestones. A pilot that had drifted into a stall, an apology that read like it had been assembled from spare parts. I recognized the cadence of a relationship becoming paperwork. "They reached out last week," Marcus said, "asked about a potential switch. They requested you, by name." He gave the sentence its space. "It seems Meridian reassigned the account to someone very green." "Jenna," I said, the syllables low. I could see her face earnest, hyper-capable in a narrow band, 6 months into a world that doesn't slow down. None of this was her fault. Marcus nodded. "We're evaluating scope with Patterson, strategic consulting plus digital transformation operations, procurement sequencing, data hygiene. If we move forward, it's a 3-year runway. I want you to lead, if you're willing. With boundaries, no privileged Meridian info. Just you, your work, your brain." I turned the page and found a note from Dana to her COO. "Evan understood that our calendar is a machine. We need that steadiness again." The line was a hand laid gently on the past without trying to drag it forward. I let myself feel it, then set it down. Preparation became its own quiet week. I built a proposal from first principles, not memory. Market analysis that didn't punish Patterson for the weather they couldn't control. A clear architecture for the digital piece data standards before dashboards, governance before glitter, timelines that reflected the speed at which humans can actually change without breaking. Priya reviewed my drafts at odd hours, returning them with comments that felt like flint small sparks, no smoke. Thursday's meeting took place in Patterson's glass-bright conference room with the river moving like a patient metronome behind us. Their 8-person leadership team arrived with the alert fatigue of people who have been carrying something heavy. We talked through the plan. At minute 30, Dana asked the question I'd already written for. "How do we move without losing lift?" "By changing the sequence, not the ambition," I said. "We'll run shadow processes for 2 sprints, map integration points, and cut over when the metrics stop lying. No heroics, just order." Her mouth twitched into the beginning of a smile. "We went deeper risk, roll back, how we'd treat knowledge like a shared asset, not a trophy. By the end of 2 hours, the pen in Dana's hand stopped tapping. She signed. The number beside her signature looked like a small, heavy ship. $6.8 million over 3 years. But more than the contract, there was this. A clause to announce the partnership at the board's quarterly meeting with language about client success and employee development. On purpose, in public. Back outside, the wind had picked up. I stood for a moment, file in my bag, breathing air that tasted clean. Across the river, Meridian's building was only another rectangle in the city. I felt no heat, no need to narrate. Just movement. The kind rivers make. The kind you notice by what it carries away, and what it brings back. News travels in Portland the way rain does, quiet, thorough, and hard to argue with. By Monday, the business journals had run the headline twice. Patterson Industries selects Northglen Analytics for multi-year strategic partnership. The articles read like weather reports with numbers, contract size, scope, a note about alignment of values around client success and employee development. My name appeared once, small and sufficient. I didn't clip it. I filed the link and went back to work. Meridian's response arrived in the shape of calendar holds and hallway whispers I could still interpret from a distance. 2 smaller accounts followed Patterson out the door. Then came an all-staff memo, curtain lacquered, about organizational realignment and cost optimization. A week later, a friend forwarded a screenshot from an internal announcement. Leadership restructuring, role consolidation, gratitude for service. In the list of eliminated positions, I recognized the title Lauren had worn like armor. I stared at the sentence until it dulled. I felt no rush, no victory rising in my throat, just the simple gravity of cause and effect, and a soft, private hope that she might someday treat people like non-renewable resources. On a Saturday in spring, my parents flew in from Ohio. We ate at a small place near the river where the menus were printed on paper you could fold, and the cook waved without ceremony. My father listened as I tried to explain what had changed without turning the story into a verdict. He turned his water glass slow in his hands, the way he always does when he's measuring. Sometimes, he said, you don't leave a place so much as you step back into yourself. My mother squeezed my wrist under the table. We ordered pie. Work has a different weight now. I spend more time in rooms where questions are allowed to be questions, and less time performing certainty I don't trust. With Patterson, the plan is moving like a river that knows its banks. We measure what matters and call setbacks by their names. The junior analysts on my team ask better questions than I did at their age. I tell them the truth about pace and patience. We label chords. We write things down we can reread later without wincing. Sometimes I walk past Meridian's building on my way home and feel absolutely nothing. Other days I feel a small ache I choose not to rename as anything larger. We are all in our ways practicing. Lauren taught me things I didn't want to learn, and I learned them anyway. Harold's sentence about instincts still lives in my pocket. So does my father's about dedication, edited now, in pen. Loyalty works when it moves in both directions. I don't pretend this is a moral. It's a ledger I keep current. Worth, work, and the cost of staying small. When I open it, I can breathe. When I close it, the numbers still add. That feels like a kind of mercy, quiet, durable mine.